Good morning, church family. Glad to see you all here this morning. Visitors, we're welcome. We're glad that you're here. We want to know that you are our honored guest, and we want to make sure you know how happy we are that you've come to worship with us this morning. I want to also remind you again, I know that Rex did a good job on the announcements with all that he had to say, but I want to make sure you know that about the nursing home devotional. If you can, please come. You will get a lot out of it. They love to have us there to sing, and they enjoy it, and I know you will be blessed as well. So please, if you can, at 2:30, come and be with us at the nursing home. The story goes that a man showed up at the gates of heaven, waiting for his turn to get in. And the man at the gate was looking through the book, and he goes, he said, "Sir, I found your name." He says, "But we got a problem." He says, "Oh no, what's that?" He says, "No, it's not a bad problem." He said, "On one hand, you haven't done anything just terribly bad that will keep you out of heaven, but on the other hand," he said, "the list of the good things here are, we just don't have a lot." He says, "Can you tell me something that you did on earth that would kind of, push you over the edge to get you into the gates?" And he goes, "Well, yeah. Because I was driving down the road, and I drove past a parking lot, and I saw this woman in distress. She was surrounded by a bunch of thugs, and I whipped that car around. I got out my baseball bat, and I walked up to the biggest one, and I said, 'Hey, you leave her alone, mister. You have to deal with me.' And then I reached over, and I grabbed his nose ring, and I ripped it out of his nose. And the angel said, 'Man, that is brave and bold and doing a good deed. That's wonderful. When did this happen?' And the man said, 'Oh, about 5 minutes ago.'" We don't know what will happen tomorrow. We don't know what will happen this evening. And most of us here live many times as if there is no tomorrow. All of us here like the popular song from the musical Annie, "The sun will come out tomorrow, bet your bottom dollar that tomorrow there'll be sun. Tomorrow, tomorrow, I love you tomorrow, you're only a day away." And don't misunderstand me, in some perspectives, living as if there will be many tomorrows is good, but in other times it can be kind of bad. You see, if we look forward to tomorrow with hope, then that's okay. That's a fine perspective. But if we have a haughty spirit and we look towards tomorrow with a haughty spirit, then we can be in danger. All this year we've been going through the book of James. We've been studying the book of James, and what we can appreciate about James is how directly he speaks to those who are reading his book. He doesn't beat around the bush. He challenges us. He encourages us to practice a life of faith that can be seen by our actions. And as we come to chapter 4, James addresses an arrogance that we sometimes display in our lives. Now, through the book of James, we've been reminded that we need to be humble before the Lord. And James applies this same kind of spirit to when we make plans for the future. He begins 13 with a parental type of attitude. "Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow, we will go into this city or that and spend a year there, carry on business, make money. You don't even know what will happen tomorrow." Verses 13 and 14. You see, the truth of the matter is none of us is in control of the future. Now, And we don't even know what will happen in the future. It amazes me how much time we all spend working at predicting the future. Here's a picture of a weatherman. And at the end of the weather forecasts, what does he do? He always gives us a 7-day outlook on what the weather pattern's supposed to be like. I don't know what the batting average is for a weatherman, but many of us, we depend on that. In fact, that's my cue to turn off the TV to go to bed at night, because if I know what the weather's going to be like the next couple of weeks, I'll sleep better. Apparently, it's a habit for me. But weathermen have his 7-day forecast. There are all kinds of people on the news right now with an election going on. Every day, every week, there's a new poll that says who's ahead and who's behind. And if these people are surveyed, then it puts this person in the lead and that person in the lead. And all the political news people are working overtime trying to give an accurate prediction on they say who's going to win the election, but the truth of the matter is many of them say who they really would like to win the election. Right now it's football season, and every year around when the football season, everybody on ESPN, they come out and all the anchors, they make their predictions about who's going to go to the Super Bowl and who's going to win the Super Bowl, and many times the majority of them don't get it right. Of course, none of us look at this, but there are many people in the world today who depend on that horoscope, who will look it up on their phones, who will find it in the newspaper, who will read about it and use the astrological signs to try to help them figure out what their day is going to be like. And some, or maybe you're one of those who don't really rely on the horoscopes because they're not totally accurate. Instead, you depend on the fortune cookie when you go to the Chinese restaurants to see what your fortune holds and what the lottery numbers are going to be in the back. It's humorous and we laugh and we get tickled at it, but there's not one of us here who would love to know what the future holds, and we want to know it badly. We'll pay big money if we could for glimpses in the future. And James makes it very, very clear. He wants it to make it very clear that none of us are unable to know the future. None of us knows for sure what will happen tomorrow, let alone what's going to happen tonight. Now, before you think I'm getting too harsh on those who like to plan ahead, let me be clear. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, while we cannot predict the future, we do not need to neglect the need for planning. There is nothing wrong with planning and making necessities of making plans. In fact, Jesus advocated planning. In Luke 14:28, he told the parable of a person who's getting ready to build a bigger building. And what does he do? Does he not sit down and figure up the costs to be sure that he has enough to finish the project? Jesus told us how we should plan for our future. He says in Matthew 6:20, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. Unfortunately, though, James says this is not what he's writing about, is not the kind of planning that Jesus is talking about. James is warning us to be sure that we ought to keep God's plans in the forefront of our mind. And the sad thing is that many of us are not doing that. Many of us plan to live our lives without an eye on what God wants. James is encouraging us in many ways to be thinking, to be planning, to be saying, if it's the Lord's will, we will do this or that, go into this or that city. Verse 15 of James chapter 4. I like it that James asks a very poignant question. What is your life? And he answers it for you. You are a mist. You appear for a little while and then you will vanish. When I think about mists, I think about a lot of things. I think about a teapot. Or around here in Texas, we call them kettles. Every one of us has a kettle. Well, not every one of you, but you should have a kettle in case you need some hot water to boil. You put the kettle on, next thing you know, you got steam coming out. Here's a picture of one. When we boil water in the kettle, the water turns into steam, but the steam doesn't just fill up the kitchen and stay there. You get about 2 feet away from that kettle, and it's going to disappear. Vapors or mists appear for a few seconds, and then they vanish. Here's another picture of something that you might be more familiar with. Foggy Valley. Somewhere, I can't remember where we were, but I remember distinctly waking up, and we were driving down the road, and it was incredibly foggy, but it was patchy. And we were following a truck that was in front of us, and this truck goes down into this little valley, and it was incredibly thick fog. And I literally saw that truck go into that fog and disappear, and then a few minutes later come out the other side. It was a very real, neat thing to see. And then you went through the fog too. No matter how thick or how heavy the fog is, though, it only appears in the early morning. It doesn't remain very long, and within hours or two, it'll be gone. Church, that is our life. We are just mists, like fog. We appear for a short time, and then we will vanish. You have all heard the saying, life is short. And that's it. No matter how long we live, life is short. If you want to, turn over to Psalms chapter 90 and look at verse 10 with me. Psalms 90:10 says, the length of our days is 70 years, or 80. If we have the strength, yet their span is troubled with sorrow, for they quickly pass, and we will fly away. Now look at verse 12. Teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. So David is saying, average lifespan of a human being is 70 years. Some might see 80, some see more. But even so, those years go by quickly. But none of us are guaranteed to receive 70 years. In other words, we can't put money down and say, I'm going to bet that I make it to 70. I'd like to make 70, but I don't know if I'll make it or not. We cannot bank on 70 years worth, and here, we can't bank on 70 years worth of tomorrows either. We just don't know. We don't know when this day or this moment will last. Here's an example of some uncertainty. Back in 2004, on December 26th, a very large earthquake occurred in the Indian Ocean that resulted in a devastating tsunami. Now, hundreds of people were caught unaware and they were swept away by the flood. But there was a Canadian couple named John and Jackie Neal. They were from Vancouver. And every year they would go and they would visit this continent. And they would go and sit on the beach. And they were on the beach when the tsunami hit. They found their digital camera and recovered it in the cleanup. And they had the final images of showing a sequence of ocean shots as the effects of the tsunami became a reality. You see, like so many, they had no idea what was taking place. 1 minute they were enjoying a beautiful, tropical Christmas vacation. They went to the beach that morning without a thought that their life would soon be over. Last Sunday, we took some time to focus our attention on the events that happened on 9/11. And many of us know and are aware of the fact that nobody went to work that day knowing what to expect. Our life is just a mist. We never know when it will vanish. And I could give you countless examples of around the world of things that happen. But, to get a little closer to home, let me put it this way. I have helped and I have officiated for over many funerals since I've become a minister. One of the oldest members that I have helped with was May Springer. She lived to be 102. The youngest was Tyler Mitchell's service. And yes, the youngest are always the hardest. But listen to what James says. He says, "Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow, we will go into this city, spend a year there, carry on business, make money, while you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes." So if we know this and we understand this now, excuse me, maybe there are some things we should avoid. There are some sins that we should avoid. What should we do? James tells us that there are three things we need to avoid. And the first one is presumption. The sin of presumption is an arrogant or maybe not so arrogant display of pride. Presumption can carry itself like a swagger, as did the rich fool in Luke chapter 12, who thought that he had many years to flaunt and enjoy his wealth. Presumption may be quiet understanding. Presumption that the motives, many of our lives, causing us to think that we have all the time in the world to do whatever we wish to plan. And we can't act like that. We can't act like one of those who thinks we can determine our future. In essence, we have to learn to humbly acknowledge that we are all, and that we might be all that we have. We are all just in the hands of God. The second sin that we need to avoid is boasting. It's interesting, the word boasting. I looked it up. Boasting has the Greek history of boasting is literally translated to sound like or to describe someone who, many of us can remember selling snake oil. The traveling salesman with the snake oil, and they'd say, cure whatever your problem is. If you had arthritis, drink this snake oil, it'll help you out. If you had headaches, drink this snake oil, it'll help you out. Boasting is just that way. Boasting is based on the invalid assumption that we are able to control our destiny. The sin of boasting, it kind of gives you a hint. Look at Proverbs 27:1, where it says, "Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring forth." How many times have we heard someone say, "I'm going to be somebody. I'm going to make $1 million before I'm 40. The boasting bug can even get into ministry. "I'm going to build the biggest church in the country. I'm going to be the best preacher there is." James says in verse 16, "As it is, you boast and you brag, and all such boasting is evil." We got to make sure that we're careful about how we are boasting and what we are boasting about. Finally, there's omission. Verse 17. "Anyone then who knows the good that he ought to do and doesn't do it sins." To know a better way and not to do it, that is sin. And I would say omission is probably the most subtle of all the sins. You see, it's one thing to know what God says not to do. We can follow those commands very, very well. We know we're not supposed to do things because the Bible says there are things we're not supposed to do, and those are sins. However, We are not so inclined, when we are not so inclined to realize that when we don't do what God has told us to do, that is sin also. James urges us to be doers of the word, not just hearers. Every minute that goes by is a gift that God gives us. It's not just a gift to be used selfishly. It is a gift to be used in the service to God and to others. We are very, very privileged to serve as God's ambassadors of love and of grace and mercy, and we cannot fail. We have to fulfill this mission. God has given us marching orders. And to fail to do what He tells us to do is a very serious sin. As to do what He has not told us to do also. So we got to have an action plan. We got to have an action plan. So let me close by telling you what our action plan is real quick. Trust God with our lives and the futures, and live one day at a time. Most of us might be too young to remember, but the generations before us may when they were handwriting letters, would probably write into the letter something like DV. Does anyone remember DV and what it stood for? The initials DV stood for Dio Volente, which means God willing. James says that we should say, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. The Apostle Paul talks about how spoke and wrote about this all the time. Acts 18:21, he told the church in Ephesus, I will come back if it is the Lord's will. 1 Corinthians 4:19 said, I will come to you very soon if the Lord is willing. 1 Corinthians 16:7 said, I hope to spend some time with you if the Lord permits. Now, I'm not saying that we should literally add this to every sentence that comes out of our mouths. Don't misunderstand me. But we should definitely be applying it to our hearts. If it's the Lord's will, should be a sediment of our words. Dio Volente, God willing, in many ways is our reality. And it has to stay on our mind. Next, we got to appreciate the moment. Don't rush through the present while we move into the future. It's so hard to get caught up on what could have been and what's going to happen now that we tend to forget that what's happening in the moment is very, very dear. I can't tell you how many times I have literally forced myself to stop and enjoy what was happening. You know, we got a really good thing going on here in this church and in this community. On Saturday night, we had 141 kids come up to Fifth Quarter, drink Cokes, eat pizza, and just socialize. We didn't have one lick of trouble. We didn't have one problem go on. Yeah, they missed the trash can every once in a while, and poor Scott and Donnie were running, picking up pizza bones and Coke cans. But what really impressed me was that no one caused a whole lot of trouble, and when we told them it was time to go, they promptly got on the phone and called their parents to come pick them up, and some even came up to Scott or Matt and somebody else said, thank you for having this. We appreciate it. We got a lot of good kids here, and we should enjoy that moment with them. Don't delay in obedience. Don't delay in obedience. The story goes that there were 3 little devils working for a big devil. And the big devil calls up the little devil and says, I want to know what your plan is to tempt and ruin mankind. The first little devil said, I got it. I'll tell the world that there is no heaven. And the big devil said, well, the They'll never believe that. See, there's this book of truth is full of messages about hope in heaven. So the second little devil says, well, I got this. I will tell them that there is no hell. And the big devil said, well, that's not good either, because this fellow named Jesus, while he was on earth, talked a lot about hell and about heaven. They know that they know that in their heart that they're wrong, and that will take care of that some way. The third little devil says, oh, well, I got the answer for you, big devil. He says, I'll just tell them that while, there may not be a heaven or a hell, but there's no hurry. And the devil said, that's the ticket. You go and you do that and you'll ruin thousands. I said this one time before, but I'll say it again. The most dangerous delusion in the church of all is that there's plenty of time. None of us know the day or the hour of Christ's return. None of us know the day or the hour of our own departure. We must not delay in our obedience. Brevity and uncertainty of life for the Christian should not cause us to fear. It should cause us to give our lives to Christ more and trust Him more. When you think about it, we don't know about tomorrow, but we do know who holds tomorrow, and we know that we need to definitely and constantly be holding to God's unchanging hand. This morning, if there's someone here who would like to respond to the invitation, we would love nothing more than for you to come forward and baptize you in the name of Jesus, to walk out the door a brand new Christian. Today is the day that you can start over. Today is the day that you can recommit your life to Christ. If you need the prayers of the church, if you'd like the help of the church, whatever you need we want to help you. Please come forward as we stand and as we sing.